Two men. Two continents. Two legends. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, a force of nature in the boxing ring. From the streets of Brooklyn to the world's grandest arenas, he built a legacy out of fear, fire, and fury. But behind the headlines, there were demons, ones the public rarely saw. And then, halfway across the globe, Manny Pacquiao, the people's champion. A boy from the slums of the Philippines who fought his way through hunger, loss, and hardship to become an 8-division world champion and a national hero. His fists made history. But his heart defined his legacy. They never trained together. They never fought each other. Their styles were different. Their lives, almost opposite. But what no one knew, until now, is that Mike Tyson once found himself in a private moment of despair. And it was Manny Pacquiao who stepped in. This is not a story about two boxers. This is a story about vulnerability. About grace. About what happens when someone uses their strength not to fight, but to uplift. Tyson, once feared by men twice his size, had spent years battling not just opponents, but himself. Bankrupt. Broken. Lost in a world that had once adored him. With fame came pressure. With fortune, temptation. And when the spotlight faded, it left behind a man unsure of who he really was. Pacquiao, meanwhile, seemed to carry a different kind of light. Even in victory, he stayed humble. Even in defeat, he prayed. To the world, he was more than a champion, he was a symbol of hope. So what brought these two together? How did a man known for violence find peace through another man known for discipline? It began with a quiet phone call. No press. No cameras. Just one message: Mike needs someone to talk to. And Manny answered. In a private room in Los Angeles, with no entourage, no media, and no gloves, Tyson met with Pacquiao for what he thought would be a short conversation. But what followed changed him forever. In this series, we'll take you behind the scenes of that meeting. We'll explore what was said, what was felt, and what was never shared until now. You've seen them in the ring. Now, you'll see them as you never have before. Because this isn't a boxing story. It's a human one. Mike Tyson's battles in the ring were legendary. The knockouts, the chaos, the aura, all of it fed into the myth of a man few dared to face. But those were not his hardest fights. His real battles came in the silence of hotel rooms after the crowds were gone. In the lonely corridors of fame. In the mirrors he avoided when the headlines faded. By the early 2000s, Tyson's life was spiraling. The former heavyweight champion of the world had become a symbol of tragedy as much as triumph. Legal troubles, broken relationships, addiction, financial collapse, each hit harder than any punch he had taken in the ring. The world watched, many with judgment, few with empathy. He once said in an interview, "I was king of the world, and then I was nobody." Those words weren't a soundbite. They were a cry. Tyson had money again, thanks to movies, appearances, and even a one-man stage show. But internally, he was still fighting a version of himself he could barely understand, a man raised in violence, trained to destroy, and never taught to heal. In the same era, Manny Pacquiao was becoming a global sensation. A small-framed fighter with the heart of a lion. Every time he entered the ring, he carried not just the hopes of a nation, but his own improbable journey, from selling donuts on the street to earning world titles. But Pacquiao was different. He didn't just rise. He transformed. Fame didn't corrupt him. It humbled him. He stayed grounded, through faith, through family, and through the belief that success meant nothing unless it lifted others. It was this mindset that brought him to Tyson. The meeting didn't happen by chance. A mutual friend, close to both fighters, had reached out to Pacquiao discreetly. Tyson was struggling again. Publicly, he was smiling. Privately, he was falling. When Manny arrived in Los Angeles for a fight week, he asked that no one be informed. No cameras. No entourage. Just him, his translator, and a quiet request: "Where's Mike?" Tyson didn't expect the visit. At first, he thought it was a formality, another polite conversation among public figures. But the moment Manny sat across from him, Tyson noticed something unusual. There was no judgment in Pacquiao's eyes. No pity. Just genuine concern. They spoke for over an hour. Pacquiao did most of the listening. Tyson, unexpectedly, did most of the talking. He opened up, not just about his past, but his fears. His regrets. His guilt. His shame. Manny didn't offer solutions. He didn't quote scripture or talk about boxing. He simply said something Tyson never forgot. You're still fighting. That means you haven't lost. It hit Mike harder than any punch ever had. Because in that moment, someone saw him not as a failure, not as a legend either, but as a man trying to heal. That single sentence reframed years of self-loathing. And Pacquiao wasn't done. Before leaving, he handed Tyson a worn, folded note. It was written in Tagalog and translated roughly to, "The man you are is not the man you must be. There is still purpose in your pain." Tyson kept that note in a drawer for years. What happened in that room was never meant to be public. And for a long time, it wasn't. But it became a turning point, one of the quiet beginnings of Tyson's slow return to himself. This wasn't the kind of support you post about. It was the kind that restores your faith in humanity. Time passed. The world moved on. Mike Tyson's name continued to surface in boxing circles, in movies, in pop culture, yet very few knew what was really changing behind the scenes. After that silent meeting with Manny Pacquiao in Los Angeles, something subtle but powerful had shifted in Tyson. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, not some overnight redemption story you read in magazines. It was slow. Painfully slow. But it was real. He stopped going out as often. Started reading more. Spent longer periods in silence. And above all, he began to reflect, not just on what he had done, but on who he could become. Then one day, in the solitude of his Las Vegas home, Tyson sat at a desk and did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter. It wasn't addressed to Manny Pacquiao directly. It wasn't even clear if he intended to send it. But line by line, word by word, Tyson poured out years of pain, guilt, and unexpected gratitude. "You looked at me that day like I was worth saving," he wrote. "I didn't even think I deserved to be looked at, let alone helped. Your silence helped me more than any loud advice I've ever gotten. You reminded me that I'm not just a story people tell at parties. I'm still here. Still breathing. Still fighting." Mike folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. That's where it stayed, unread by anyone, for over a year. It would take a second encounter for him to finally hand it over. In 2018, Tyson and Pacquiao found themselves booked at the same charity event in New York. Their teams were tight on security, but Tyson requested one small moment, just 2 minutes alone with Manny. Pacquiao agreed immediately. In a quiet corner of the hotel, Mike reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper, now slightly yellowed at the edges. He didn't say much. Just handed it to Manny with a soft, almost trembling, "This is for you. I meant to give it to you a long time ago." Pacquiao took it, nodded, and placed it in his coat pocket without reading it on the spot. He respected Tyson too much to treat it casually. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Manny read the letter alone. The words were raw. Unpolished. But they held the kind of sincerity that no press conference could capture. When he finished, he whispered, "Thank you, brother," into the silence. Then he folded the letter back up and placed it in the Bible he traveled with, a symbolic gesture that spoke volumes about how much it meant to him. The two men didn't speak publicly about the exchange. They didn't need to. Something unspoken had passed between them, a connection deeper than fame or fighting. But here's where the story takes a twist. Manny didn't just keep the letter. He shared its essence, with permission, with a group of young men back in the Philippines. They were part of a rehabilitation center funded quietly by Pacquiao, one that worked with youth who had fallen into addiction, gang violence, or poverty. To them, he said, even giants fall. But the greatest thing a man can do is rise again and help others do the same. Unbeknownst to Tyson, his pain and his recovery were already helping others, just as Manny had once helped him. What began as one private moment between two fighters had now begun to echo far beyond them. Mike Tyson had always been a man of extremes. From the violent fury in the ring to the chaos of his personal life, he didn't live halfway. He knew it. The world knew it. But something about that second encounter with Manny Pacquiao in New York had left him with an unfamiliar feeling: peace. Not the kind of peace you get from applause or a check. This was deeper. It was the sense that, maybe for the first time in years, someone believed in the man he could still become, not just the man he used to be. The letter he had given Manny was more than a confession. It was a promise to himself. And now, he intended to keep it. Tyson wasn't a preacher. He wasn't trying to become a saint. But he began asking himself tough questions. What am I doing with my second chance? What did Manny see in me that I haven't seen in myself? That's when he remembered something Pacquiao had once said in an interview. The reporter had asked how Manny stayed grounded despite fame, power, and wealth. Manny had replied, "God didn't give me blessings just for me. He gave them to me so I could be a blessing to others." That line echoed in Tyson's mind like a drumbeat. One morning, he called his manager and said, "I want to do something different. Real different. Not about me. About people who never got a shot." Within weeks, Tyson was in contact with youth shelters and rehabilitation centers in the Bronx and Brooklyn. But he didn't just want to visit. He wanted to build something. Something lasting. And so, in 2019, behind closed doors, Mike Tyson began funding a pilot program called Iron Path. Its mission: help at-risk youth, especially those with criminal records or troubled pasts, find stability through mentorship, physical fitness, emotional support, and job training. But here's the part no one expected. He never attached his name to it. No press release. No social media posts. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. The only reason the public knows about it now is because one of the former participants, now a college graduate, shared the story on a podcast, calling it "the place that saved my life." Tyson would visit once or twice a month, sometimes just to sit in the back and listen. Other times, he'd take the kids through boxing drills, not to make them fighters, but to teach them discipline, focus, and release. He told them the truth. About prison. About betrayal. About shame. And he told them about the letter. The one he wrote to someone he called a quiet champion. "He didn't give me a lecture," Tyson told the kids. "He gave me a look. A moment. And that was enough to make me want to be better." You don't need $1 million to change someone's life. Sometimes, all it takes is presence. Belief. Back in the Philippines, Manny had no idea. He had never asked Tyson for anything, not credit, not a favor. In fact, he assumed their story ended with that letter. But one day, a man who worked for Manny's foundation showed him a video from the Bronx. A clip that had been shared privately among donors. It was a dimly lit gym. The floor was scuffed. The equipment was old. But the energy was electric. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Mike Tyson, hands wrapped, sweat pouring, mentoring a teenager who had just gotten out of juvenile detention. The caption on the video was simple. Iron Path, founded by a man who once lost his way, but found the courage to help others find theirs. Manny watched the video twice. Then, with a smile, he looked up and said, "That's the Tyson I saw." This was the promise Tyson kept. Not to Manny. Not even to the world. But to himself. To prove that redemption isn't about pretending the past never happened. It's about taking responsibility for your story, and using it to write a better ending for someone else, years past. The world moved on. Tyson continued his quiet work in the background while Manny focused on his own causes: education, poverty, healthcare, building a life far beyond boxing. But fate, it seems, wasn't finished with the two champions. In 2022, a major global youth summit was scheduled in Los Angeles. Titled Voices of Change, the event aimed to spotlight leaders who had turned their personal pain into purpose. Organizers searched for speakers who could inspire, not with polished speeches, but with real stories. One name kept coming up in planning meetings: Mike Tyson. Not for his boxing legacy, but for his unheard role in launching the Iron Path initiative, which by now had quietly expanded into multiple cities. When they approached Tyson's team, he agreed, on one condition: if I'm doing this, I want Manny there with me. The organizers reached out to Pacquiao. He didn't hesitate. His only request was simple: don't make it about us. Make it about what's possible. And so, on a clear April morning, two legends stepped into a different kind of arena, a packed auditorium filled with thousands of students, teachers, youth advocates, and changemakers. They walked out to a quiet standing ovation. No roar of the crowd like in their prime days. No ring bells. Just respect. Tyson spoke first. Gone was the angry, volatile persona the world remembered. Instead, there stood a man speaking slowly, intentionally. I've been a champion, he said, and I've been a prisoner. I've been feared, and I've been forgotten. But the hardest thing I ever did wasn't stepping into the ring, it was learning to live with myself outside of it. He paused. There was a time when I didn't care if I lived or died. Then I met a man who reminded me of something I'd lost: dignity. He didn't lecture me. He didn't judge me. He just saw me. He turned slightly toward Manny. That man was Manny Pacquiao. The audience leaned in. Manny took the mic, not to bask in the attention, but to shift the focus. The world often tells us that being strong means being loud, being rich, being famous. But I have learned that the strongest people are often the ones who choose kindness when they could choose anger. The ones who show up when no one's watching. He looked at Mike. And sometimes, those people surprise you. For the next 40 minutes, the two men told their stories, not as celebrities, but as survivors. They spoke of poverty, of broken families, of addiction and abandonment. They spoke of pain, not as victims, but as examples of what's possible when pain is redirected toward purpose. They talked about second chances, not just the ones given to them, but the ones they gave to others. Tyson shared a story of a young man from the Bronx who had been through 3 foster homes and 2 arrests before joining Iron Path. That same young man was now mentoring others, just as Tyson had mentored him. Pacquiao spoke about a girl from a poor fishing village in the Philippines, who became the first in her family to attend college because of a scholarship his foundation funded. The message was clear. The real championship, Manny said, is not won in a ring. It's won in how many lives you lift with yours. By the end, the audience was in tears. Not from sadness, but from seeing what grace, redemption, and humility can look like in action. After the talk, they didn't retreat to luxury green rooms or take selfies for PR. Instead, they spent nearly 2 hours walking through the crowd, listening to young people's stories, hugging kids who had lost parents, encouraging former gang members who were trying to rebuild their lives. There was no camera catching those quiet moments. Just 2 men, once considered icons for their power, now remembered for their character. Later that evening, one journalist who had covered both their careers wrote on Twitter, "Today, I saw Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao deliver a masterclass, not in boxing, but in humanity." But for Manny and Mike, there was no performance. No agenda. Just a shared belief that if you've been given a platform, it's your responsibility to use it not to elevate yourself, but to lift others. They had once fought battles in different corners of the globe. Now, they stood together, fighting for the next generation. As the lights dimmed on the Voices of Change summit and the audience filed out, what remained wasn't applause, it was a shift in energy. That day had reframed how people saw Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao, not just as legends of the ring, but as architects of hope. But neither of them lingered on that moment. In their eyes, true legacy wasn't built in arenas. It was lived in silence, far away from headlines. In the months following their joint appearance, the ripple effects began to unfold. Tyson's nonprofit, Iron Path, saw an immediate influx of volunteers and donations. But rather than scaling fast, Mike insisted on growing slow and right. "I don't want this to become a brand," he told his board. "I want it to remain a bridge for kids who've lost their way." He personally mentored 5 new program leaders in Los Angeles and Newark, often visiting the neighborhoods himself. He sat with teenagers who had never heard of his boxing days. He didn't need them to know Iron Mike. He needed them to know they mattered. Pacquiao, meanwhile, returned to the Philippines, quietly expanding his Pacquiao Foundation's reach. He increased funding to rural schools and clinics, launched new mental health initiatives, and began a cultural exchange program to connect underprivileged students from Southeast Asia with mentorship opportunities abroad. But he never mentioned the summit, not in interviews or speeches. When asked, he only said, "You don't serve to be seen. You serve because you've seen suffering." Months later, during an interview with The Atlantic about athlete activism, the journalist asked Mike, "You've worked with a lot of people. Who's someone that changed you?" Tyson leaned back. "That's easy. Manny Pacquiao." The journalist raised an eyebrow. "Because of boxing?" Mike smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "No. Because of who he is when no one's watching." That comment sparked interest. Writers began digging. They had seen Manny support charities before, but never knew about the private letters, the late-night calls, or how he had helped fund the early stages of Iron Path anonymously. And yet, there were no press releases. No social media posts. No PR agents spinning it. One day, a young filmmaker named Julia Ko, herself a former student helped by Tyson's program, decided to create a short documentary titled The Quiet Corner. It wasn't about boxing. It wasn't even really about Manny or Mike. It was about men who chose humility over hype. The 22-minute film focused on how private acts of kindness often outlive public praise. It used Tyson's rough beginnings and Pacquiao's rise from poverty as the backdrop but focused on their transformation after the ring. The final scene was simple. A shot of Mike walking through a community center in Brooklyn, talking to a group of boys about forgiveness. Then a cut to a small rural school in Sarangani province, where kids were unpacking new school supplies, each box stamped quietly with a symbol, not a name. No narration. No title cards. Just a voiceover from Tyson, taken from an old interview. You know what the real fight is? It's not in the ring. It's waking up every day and choosing not to be angry at the world that hurt you, and instead, deciding to heal others. The film won several awards. But neither man attended the premieres. Tyson was in Albuquerque, spending time at a youth recovery home. Pacquiao was visiting a hospital wing he helped build but never named after himself. They didn't need the recognition. The work was the reward. Eventually, the story made its way to mainstream media. Not as a scandal or a flashy reveal, but as an example of true quiet power. News anchors spoke not just about their friendship, but about how it reflected something deeply needed in the world, men with influence choosing integrity over attention. A New York Times editorial even called it a case study in character, 2 former champions reminding us that the most important victories happen off camera. Still, neither Manny nor Mike changed. If anything, they became quieter. Pacquiao turned down multiple global awards and kept his foundation's focus sharp. Tyson refused a branding deal that would have turned Iron Path into a reality show. "These kids aren't content," he said. "They're people. And I won't use them to relive my fame." Today, both men rarely speak about each other publicly. But their bond runs deep. They still check in. Sometimes it's a short text. Sometimes a video call to pray for each other's family. No performances. No fame. Just mutual respect, 2 men who understand what the other endured, and more importantly, how they chose to grow through it. Their story isn't about redemption alone. It's about responsibility, how to use pain to light a path for someone else. And perhaps the most powerful part? They never set out to be heroes. They just refused to let their worst moments define them. Instead, they let them refine them. And in doing so, created a legacy more lasting than belts, trophies, or titles. They built something better. Sometimes, the most powerful punches are the ones the world never sees. By now, the world had come to know a piece of the story, the friendship, the healing, the quiet acts of generosity between Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao. But there was still one part no one fully grasped. One part that defined why this story mattered more than any title fight ever could. It wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about PR. It was about a hidden moment that reshaped a broken man's life. A few years before Mike Tyson ever went public with his transformation, he was living in a quiet emotional storm. His fame had faded, his money had been mismanaged, and his past mistakes haunted him like shadows that refused to leave. He would often stay up late, staring at the ceiling in silence. Regret was a daily visitor. Then came a phone call. It was from someone unexpected, Manny Pacquiao. Mike didn't know why Manny called that day. He wasn't looking for a favor. He wasn't trying to collaborate. He just listened. Mike would later say, "Manny didn't give me a sermon. He didn't judge me. He just talked to me like I mattered." That night, something shifted. Manny didn't try to fix Mike. He just saw him, the man behind the scars, the kid who never had peace. And sometimes, being seen is what saves you. That moment was the seed of their bond. What came next were months of quiet interactions. They met up in private. They prayed together. They laughed about things no one else would understand. They were two fighters from opposite corners of the world, finding brotherhood not in violence, but in vulnerability. Manny once told Mike, "The only fight that matters is the one with yourself. And you're winning that, brother." Those words stuck. So when people asked Mike years later how he managed to change, he often gave credit to his wife, to therapy, to faith, but he always mentioned Manny as the one who reached into the silence without asking for anything back. What made Manny different? He never wanted to be praised. While many public figures used charity for clout, Pacquiao gave away nearly half of his earnings quietly, never making a spectacle of it. He would visit hospitals at midnight, so paparazzi wouldn't follow. He funded education programs under fake foundations just to keep attention off himself. One story, never confirmed by Manny but widely believed, tells of how he paid off the medical debts of over 200 patients in a Manila hospital anonymously, walking out before anyone could even thank him. When asked about it later, he said, "I've been poor. I know what it means to feel invisible. So I try to make people feel seen, even if I never get credit." That was the essence of Manny's character. And it's why Tyson never forgot what he did for him. Because Pacquiao saw the broken man behind the media headlines and gave him space to rebuild, with dignity. This story isn't about a comeback. It's not about Mike Tyson returning to fame, or Manny Pacquiao's continued success. It's about how two men, once defined by violence, rewrote their stories with compassion. Together, they helped build programs that have transformed thousands of lives. Former gang members now run youth centers. Kids who once idolized aggression now preach peace. Families torn by addiction now live in healing. And none of it made the front page. But that's the point. They didn't do it to be seen. They did it because they remembered what it was like to be forgotten. Years later, at a quiet awards ceremony that neither intended to attend, the presenter read a letter aloud. It was from a 14-year-old boy named Andre, once incarcerated for assault, now a mentor at a community gym. He wrote, "I never knew my father. But when I met Mr. Tyson, I felt like I was finally worth something. He told me I wasn't my past. He told me I could fight for something bigger. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Pacquiao, even though we've never met. Your story saved someone who thought he didn't matter." Mike wiped a tear from his eye. Manny just bowed his head in silence. No speeches. No drama. Just a quiet moment where they saw the fruits of seeds sown in private. In the end, this story wasn't really about boxing. It was about what happens after the cheering stops. About two men, one from Brooklyn, one from General Santos City, who climbed out of their darkest places and used their light to guide others home. Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao may have been champions in the ring. But their greatest victory? Choosing empathy over ego. Choosing to lift rather than knock down. Choosing to serve, even when no one was watching. And maybe that's the most inspiring legacy of all. Because in a world full of noise, they taught us that the real champions are often the ones we never see.